Welcome to the Business as Mission podcast, dedicated to those who long to see God glorified in business and the nations reached for Christ. Your host is Mike Bayer, longtime BAM leader and founder of Third Path Initiative, an online education resource for starting and growing BAM businesses around the world.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Business as Mission podcast. I am really excited with our guest this morning. Robert has been a friend, a colleague. In many ways, he doesn't know this, but in many ways, a mentor and a challenger to me, as he has this amazing passion for leadership and discipleship in the business world, but through the church. This is not a parachurch conversation. This is very much what can the church do in the world of business. I have to introduce him. He is Dr. Robert Cross. He's smiling because he just got his doctorate 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago? It hasn't been very long.
A month ago, you know?
Yeah, so he's paid the price, and now he has the diploma, but congratulations on that, Robert. But more importantly, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to a great discussion.
Yeah, me too. You and I have always had great conversations before, and different things we've talked about. So that's why I thought, got to get this guy on the podcast. So, Robert, give us some background, and just to sort of give context to our audience. You know, who are you? What's your journey been like to where you are now? What is the main thing that you're focused on today? Just tell us a bit of your story.
So I grew up in Massachusetts, Webster, Mass. I grew up. I had a very difficult growing up. Parents divorced, went through all kinds of foster homes and things like that. Joined the Marines when I was 17, and I served there for 4 years. And when I got back, I got really sick with the Gulf War syndrome, and it was at that time I had a friend in the Marines. His name was Paul, and he was sharing the gospel with me. And I remember praying to receive Christ before I went to the Gulf War, because I said, well, I better make sure I'm right with God. I might not make it back. And then on the way, I got back to, like I said, tremendous trials and stuff. And I was talking to my friend going, I don't understand my life. I don't understand the way it is. And I need to go see a shrink. And he goes, well, let Jesus be a shrink. And the next day was the first time I went to church. And the pastor, and it was a large church, and the pastor's up there talking. He goes, so many people look at their life and wondering why they are the way they are, and they have all these questions of why, and they want to go see a shrink. And he goes, why don't you let Jesus be a shrink? And I went, whoa.
I've already heard that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, whoa. Do you know the pastor? And he, my friend didn't know the pastor either, and so that was the first time I really felt God really in my life. And soon after that, he told me to attend a group, a college and career group, and he said it'll change your life. And all of a sudden, for the first time, I got involved with this group of people who just accepted me for who I was. Yeah. And that was rare for me, because growing up, I always wore a mask, and I always had to try to be somebody to be accepted. And so I ended up reading the Bible, and all of a sudden talking about Jesus to other people and praying with other people to receive Christ. And so I've always had this passion for evangelism ever since I first got saved. I've also had a second passion of reading the Bible and reading, learning the Word. And I never read a book before I was a Christian. So all of a sudden I'm reading, theses, lectures in systematic theology and loving it. Not understanding half the words in there, but I still loved it. So I had this real passion for the Word, real passion for discipleship. I got married. I had a young family, and I was like, I was very ambitious, and I was working for these other people, and I got frustrated because, they would promote these other kids right over me. And I was like, what if we do this? And what if we do that? And well, I found out that a lot of managers and owners don't like that. They just want you to do what you're told. And so I had a friend of mine tell me, you need to go start your own business. And I'm like, whoa, I don't know anything about a business or anything like that. I mean, I was just out of Marine Corps for a few months, and I don't know how to do that, but I sold a car and I cleaned it really well. One thing about the Marines, if you know anything, is they clean really well. So I got a car. I went to go sell. My friend goes, this was like the next day after my friend told me to go start a business. He goes, you ought to detail cars, man. You're really good. I'm like, okay. The next day I started my first business, auto detailing. I wanted to just provide for my family. And I never knew anything about a clergy lady divide or anything. I just said, wow, what an opportunity. I get to meet people and share the gospel, because that's all I wanted to do. So naturally, I just started sharing the gospel with people. I grew the business. I was very successful. I went from a auto detailing business, and then I bought this big thing, a commercial pressure washer, 3,000 psi hot water. And I'm like I remember a job I had that used to do this, and I'm like, hey, I could do this. And now all of a sudden, I'm hiring other people, and I'm like, wow, God's not only blessing me, but I get to bless other people as well. And so, and I always use that as a format to, share the gospel, as a platform. Anywhere I go, I look to share the gospel. And so the business grew. I was sharing the gospel. And then one day the Lord said, I'm going to use your business so you can go plant a church. So you don't have to, beg and scrap for money and all this other stuff. And so the business had grown to be a very large, successful business. And I was using it to share the gospel. And then one day I said, okay, we're going to go to Arizona and we're going to plant the church out there. And so I still had the business in San Diego, moved to Arizona. Luckily, the Lord blessed the business. I found my business partner was great. We worked well together, even though we were in separate parts. So, and then I said, well, what can I do to reach people? What's a good way to reach people? And I thought, well, I remember I saw these inflatables. I'm like, you know what? Let's go buy one. And so I planted the church. I said, let's go buy. So I had my business essentially funding the church. And I said, well, let's go buy one of these inflatables. And so we bought an inflatable, a bouncy house, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And we brought it to the park. And we started going around saying, hey, if your kids want to come play on the inflatable, why don't they come on out and play on the inflatable? So while they were doing that, we were telling people about Jesus. We were sharing the gospel with people. And the church was blowing up, no pun intended. So because I've started essentially two different businesses. I had the auto detailing business, then I had the commercial cleaning business. And the commercial cleaning business was rather large. So I said, well, why don't I just, would it be cool? Think about this. If we have more of these things, we could reach more people. We can set up different things. And so I said, why don't I just start a business? So here I got this church plant going on that we're only, a few months old. So we buy a whole bunch of these inflatables, start a business, and man, it just exploded. The business, I'm involved in the city. They hire me for all their events. I became the chaplain for the police department. We started a nonprofit organization where the city came together, the city manager, the mayor, the fire chief, police chief, the rec department came together along with service organizations like churches and the Red Cross and food banks. And we started this organization. We were just blessing the city. And so of course, my part was I brought the fun. So we had a school dance, for example. We had a school dance. And I brought, a few inflatables and games, and the service people brought food and stuff. And like 400 kids showed up at this dance. And we hired an evangelist to share the gospel. So I'm like, wow, look at these lures. God calls us to be fishermen. I got these lures called inflatables that are just attracting a lot of people. And we're able to share the gospel. We're able to tell people about the church. And then, of course, as a business, we're renting them out. We had an indoor facility that we also used as our church. So we didn't have any rent because the business church location. So really, I was really integrating my business and ministry, using it as a platform to share the gospel. I would be out with people hire us. How'd you start this business? I'm like, well, we came out here to plant a church, and I felt God calling us out here. And so we out. Oh, really? Blah, blah. Hey, can you pray for me? Well, yeah, I'd love to pray for you. So what I discovered is, I have 30 years of business experience and 30 years of ministry experience concurrently. Because of that, I've never taken a paycheck from the church. I've never had to, because God had always blessed it financially. And so, that's a blessing. We were able to give back more to the community. We did Thanksgiving outreaches, fed 500 people. We got together with the city to raise $3,000 for a police officer who had fallen into the line of duty for his family. Yeah. All because of the business was giving me a platform to share the gospel. I mean, this is incredible. And I've always said this, I've done more ministry through the business than I have as a pastor. And so it was very exciting. We would go out on Memorial Day and Labor Day, bring 8 or 9 inflatables out, invite the whole community out. We would never tell them it was the church. We would not invite anybody to church from those events. What we did is we developed relationships with people. And as we develop relationships with people, once we develop the relationship with people, then we would talk to them about Jesus, and then we would invite them to the church. And so we were very intentional about what we were doing. So because of that business, I was able to get involved in all kinds of city events, meet all kinds of people, participate in all kinds of outreaches. Even the Lewis Palau organization came to Phoenix, and we were part of that with our business. Then went through a difficult time with the recession. I won't get into all that, but that brought me to Worcester, Mass, where I was still, the VA was taking care of me. And I was like, I still had the business in San Diego. So, but now I'm running it from Worcester. I ended up selling that business to the person who was running it. And I'm like, okay, my son came to me and said, hey, Dad, can you help me start the business out here? So I said, sure. I started the party rental business out here. Again, these are great tools. And I was using it for ministry. At this time, I was just in a church, though. I wasn't planting a church just yet. So what happened
as I'm listening to you, Robert, I just the word that keeps coming back to my mind is the word starter.
Yes.
And not to interrupt you, I want our listeners to stop and realize that we talk a lot about entrepreneurs, and you certainly are that, but it's a word that very few people really understand. And as I'm listening to your story, I'm like, this is a classic entrepreneurial story, because you have a mission, and you start stuff, and you stay true to mission, and you keep starting stuff. And I thought, I'm thinking, if anybody listening to this podcast, anybody in the audience says, I can't do it, it's like, yeah, you can do that. You can do that. And Robert's a living proof of it. So I not to pull you off topic, but I just kept coming back. So carry on, please.
It's a great point, because I was going to make this point a little bit later, but I'll make it now. So here was a guy who grew up with nothing, barely graduated high school, joins the Marines. I did very well. Started a business not knowing what I was doing. I didn't even know how to detail cars. I remember calling other auto details. Hey, how do I do this? I didn't care. I felt God called me to something, and I was going to do everything I could to achieve what I believe God called me to. And that really is the basis and the motivation behind what I did. The passion for that comes from because I realized what God has done in my life. He's forgiven me. He's washed me clean. He's provided for me. He's going to give me eternity with him forever. Romans 12, 1-2, we're all familiar with. Lay your life down as a sacrifice. And it says, which is a reasonable service. I paraphrase that. It's the least you can do for all that God has done for you. Yeah. So I give 100% to everything I do. And it doesn't matter what background you come from. If you feel God's calling you to do something, you've heard this. It's not a pithy saying where God guides, God provides. Well, God provides in wisdom as well. Mm-hmm. And again, I was willing to call anybody I could. How do I do this? I never ran a business. I didn't know anything. I grew up in foster homes, bounced around from house to house. So that's a really good point. So I'm here. I'm involved in church. I still have the inflatable. We start the business. I'm still using it as a platform to share Christ. As a matter of fact, one of the councilwomen invited me to come on her show because she was so intrigued of how I could use my business as a platform. And this woman was an atheist. And she was so impressed at how I could use my business as a platform to share Christ. She was going, how do you do that without people wanting to rip your head off? And I said, well, if you provide a superior product, superior service, that's the first step of the door opening for you to be able to share. It gives you a foundation to share. If I provide horrible service, if I provide a less than great product, well, then that closes that door.
And it should, by the way. I don't want my business. I don't want my sloppy business besmirching the name of Christ. Exactly. I want to do business to the glory of God.
Yes. And that, by the way, that is a kind of a problem in our culture, by the way, where people say, I'll never use a Christian, but that's another topic. So here I am on this TV show with her, sharing the gospel with her and saying, well, does anybody ever get mad at you? I said, no one's ever gotten mad at me. No one's ever kicked me off their property. No one's ever told me to be quiet. And she said, well, what's the secret? I said, as soon as they ask me a question, as soon as they ask me, how'd you start your business? How'd you get into this business? I say this a lot, and you'll hear this from me a lot. Every question asked of you is an opportunity to point to Jesus, no matter what the question is. And so I've really learned to just be sensitive to the Holy Spirit when that question's asked, to point to Jesus. And so people, they don't get mad at me telling my story when I'm really sharing the gospel. So now I'm in this place where I got this business in San Diego, and God opened up the door for me. The VA, Veterans Administration, calls me up one day and says, "Hey, you never done voc rehab." I said, "Well, I didn't know I could. I got a business here. I've been very successful." And, and he goes, "Well, you can still do it." And I said, "I've always had a desire to go to school. I took a few classes right out of the Marines, but didn't do too well because I was too busy trying to do other things and, starting a business, But here I'm in this place where the VA asked me, I said, "Okay, yeah, let me now keep my, I was ordained before I ever went to seminary or school. Because I was just a passion for the word. I'd read. You can see some of my library behind you. I read a lot."
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is I went to school. I got my bachelor's degree with a minor in business. So now I got a piece of paper that says I might know what I'm talking about with business. So anyway, and so then the VA calls me up. I finished my bachelor's. They call me up and they said, "Hey, how'd you like to go get your master's degree?" And do you ever have those moments when, you don't have to pray about it, you just know? You want to go for your master's? Let me pray about that. Yes. So the VA paid for my master's. And so I went for a master's degree, a master of divinity in leadership. During this time I was going, I had a few people whisper in my ear, "Go for your doctorate, go for your doctorate." And I'm like, why? Now during this time, what happened is, right before 2 months before COVID, we had some friends of ours, and we, felt the call some friends of mine were asking me, "Hey, Robert, you should plant a church. You should plant a church, plant a church." It wasn't really on my agenda, but some situations that happened to where I was like, okay. So we started a church in my home, another starter. So now we got 3 businesses started and 2 churches now planted. And 2 months before COVID, and we just boom. In 2 months we grew. It was great. Again, we were using the inflatables as a platform to tell people the same thing. We were getting involved in some city events. I became the chaplain for the police department out here. We bought a police cruiser inflatable that we use at the police department, and it's a great community, connects us with the community in a great way. Again, I was looking for the most strategic ways to impact the most amount of people. Well, you put up an inflatable in any type of city event, you're attracting a lot of people. Sure. And so that gives us a great platform to share the gospel, to talk about the church, to talk about what we're doing. So now so I had this itch to go for my doctorate, didn't know what for. And then I went to a conference in Sedonecki, New York. And I was going to go for discipleship because I really like discipleship. I'm all about making disciples. I don't believe in just making conversions. I believe in impacting in a great way, teaching all that Jesus. And so we got this church. So anyway, we got this church that we planted. It's 2 months old. COVID hits. Wow, that was painful. Trying to launch a new organization 2 months before COVID. So, but hey, we got through it. We're still here. We're still growing. So, and we're using the inflatables. And I'll share something else. But let's go back to the doctorate. So I got this itch in my ear, and so I go up there. I was going to go for a doctorate of ministry, and somebody says we should go for a doctorate of education. They got this new program at the school I was going to, which is Liberty University, and they said they got this doctorate of education and leadership. I'm like, wow, okay. So sign up for it. Of course, I didn't realize it was a 60 credit doctorate, not a 30, so which is much longer.
Yeah. In
the process of doing this church plant, going for my doctorate, we adopted a set of twins, which, talk about challenges, but that's a different story. That's a whole new start.
I tell you, anyway, I wish we were putting out a video version of this, Robert, because your kids they're just beautiful children. Yes. So sweet, thoughtful, and energetic. And I wish I've seen them obviously on screen with you, and you're blessed with that for sure.
Beautiful. So here I am, and now I gotta do qualitative dissertation. I'm like, what is that? I don't even know. And so, of course, we learn going through the classes what this is, and I'm struggling what to do it on. And so I said, I got that what I call the Holy Spirit slap in the head. And for Mike, you and I, we can hear that slap. Robert, you've been doing ministry and business for 30 years concurrently. You've used it as a platform to share the gospel. Why don't you do it on that? And so I'm like, oh my gosh, how amazing is that? And so I started this journey of this dissertation on it's a multi-case qualitative research. And so my hope was I wanted to be church-based because I never heard anything about business in church. They don't talk about it. They don't have it. No churches that I never heard of a sermon for business leaders or anything like that. As I started researching this, I came across this excellent book, The Pastor and the Business Person by this guy named Mike Baer. I started reading it.
It's trash, man. Come on, don't read that book.
But I started reading this, and all of a sudden I started learning about this clergy lady dividing the secular. I'm like going, that's foreign to me. I've always used my business as a platform. So I'm like, wow, people. And so I started researching this more and more, and I said, wow. And so I wanted to do a study to see if any churches that offered discipleship to business leaders, how it impacted them. If it helped them in furthering the gospel, if it helped them to use their business as a platform to share the gospel. So what I did is, and to tell you how this is not happening in the church, it took me 6 months to find participants, to find 4 ministry leaders who teach a class or have a program exclusively for business leaders, not for just people that go to work. It's for business leaders, because I believe they can be the crux of the next, revival in America, to be honest. And then I found 4 participants who attended the business discipleship program to see how it impacted them in 5 core areas. Their calling. Did it help them to understand their calling, that the calling of a business person is just have a calling as a pastor? In their spiritual formation. Did it help them grow in their prayer life, in their word, in their stewardship, whatever areas? Third was did it help contribute to church growth? Fourth was their community involvement. Did it help the business leader get involved in the community in some way, shape, or form? And lastly is how it impacted the business leader itself and the business as being used as a platform to share Christ. There was a lot of questions, some questions that try to answer those questions, but the reality is it was church-based. There was no research on church-based discipleship to business leaders anywhere. We're on to something. And so I just happen to be a person who has 30 years experience in both, doing this thing to see how it impacts. And the powerful thing is in all 5 areas, there's a positive outcomes. It helped the business leader understand their calling. Once they understood their calling, it impacted all the other areas. Their spiritual formation, their church growth, in sharing the gospel and inviting people to church. And it helped them in their community involvement, even to the point where some people ran for office because they wanted a greater voice. It helped the business as far as being used as a platform to share Christ. All 8 participants believed positively that it impacted positively the business leader to use their business as a platform to share the gospel. This is powerful research. And now you have something substantial, empirical, that shows, listen, churches, it's time to start investing into your business leaders. Now, one of the things I discovered is that there's a big intimidation factor for pastors. They're intimidated by business leaders. Man. I mean, we're assertive, we're aggressive, we're go-getters, we're driven, and pastors are too, but in different ways. And then you got business. The business leaders are intimidated by the pastors because, I'm not as spiritual as them. I don't know the Bible like they do. I'm not a theologian, and so that tension is there. And so what we discovered is, first of all, what I would like to do, where I believe God's leading me, and what God is calling me to do, is first of all, I think we need to educate pastors on the need and how they can minister to business leaders in their church. The second emphasis that I have is, how can we educate business leaders to how to use their business as a platform to share the gospel? How do they do that? And again, what's wonderful is not only have I done it, but we have business leaders who also have done it, and all of it's proven that it can work and be effective in reaching people for the gospel.
We'll be right back after a short break.
Robert, as I'm listening to you, I keep thinking about, if only, and this is going to, I hope it didn't come out like a criticism, it's not meant to be, but if only pastors could understand that as they're truly equipping the business people, particularly the business leaders in their congregation, they're discipling them to go make disciples in and through their business, the impact in the community and the impact in the world would be amazing. It would be a very powerful, amazing thing But what ends up happening, and you and I have talked a lot about this, what ends up happening is what you've discovered, very few are doing it. So there's parachurch organizations that do it, or guys are out there trying to do it on their own. I mean, they've got a passion for the Lord, and they come back to the church. And I've heard this from many, many business people, and I hate this statement because it hurts. They find the church pretty irrelevant to their Monday through Friday, Monday through Saturday life, and because all they want to do is make a difference for the Lord. And yes. I just think, as I'm listening to you and as we've talked, if pastors could address whatever it is that holds them back, whatever fear, whatever intimidation, whatever prejudice, whatever it is, and just jump in, the business leaders would welcome this. Most of them would absolutely welcome somebody who would be willing to pour into their spiritual life because they need it, and they know they need it.
I think there's two factors. One I already addressed was the intimidation factor. The other factor is, I think from a pastor's perspective, is we're not going to find the time to do that.
Yeah.
Not only that, business leaders pastors don't believe that they know anything about business. I was talking to a pastor a couple months ago, and I said, well, you ought to think about utilizing your assets of your church, kind of using it as a way to develop a stream of income for the church, because he was talking about how the church was struggling financially. And he says, well, I don't know anything about business. I said, oh, pastor, you're wrong. I said, is money coming in and you spending money? Yes. Then you understand business.
Right.
In a sense, are you marketing your church? Well, I guess so, and I don't like to use that word much, but, essentially they are. So you understand. So, which leads me to another point I want to address, by the way. We are now also utilizing our inflatables as a stream of revenue for the church here.
How does that work?
What we did is we started a business under the church name, and we use the inflatables. So we rent out the inflatables. So this is like another new business, if you want to call it, because after COVID, I handed over the business to my son because that was the whole goal of it. So we still have all these assets. My son actually, after COVID, it hit us so hard, months of not being able to rent anything. And so he decided that he wanted to get out of it. And so we said, well, we still have all these assets on these inflatables and stuff. So what we started to do is we made basically a company within the church under the church umbrella where we rent these out. We have insurance and everything, just like a normal business. However, all the income is written to the church. And so it's an additional stream of revenue for the church, which Mark Demez down there is really big into this about having multiple streams of income for churches. And I know, there's some people who, don't like that idea, and it's a risk. However, for us, it's not a risk because we already own all the assets. So it's not like we're investing a whole lot of money into something like this. But that's, again, still using it as a business, as a catalyst to reaching the community. But I think the pastors, back to the question, I know I went off on a rabbit trail and I have a habit of doing that. But back to the pastors, it really is equipping the pastors to say, listen, we're not asking you as the pastor to disciple the business leaders when they have much more experience than you in business per se. What we're asking you to do is find that business leader in your church who could be that catalyst. Now, one interesting thing that came out of the dissertation was that business leaders aren't looking to pastors to help them run their business. They don't want that. They don't want the pastor saying, well, this is how you should run your business and all this other stuff. What they want is they want pastors to tie in biblical principles to their business. And so that's really important. Just tell me if I'm running my business like God wants me to run my business, the principles. And if you give them that, they get in these situations where I'm not sure what to do here. I got this customer who won't pay me. How do I go about in a biblical way, in a godly way of getting paid? Normally you write these nasty words, if you don't pay, I'm going to send you to court, blah, blah, blah. Well, that sometimes is not that kind of closes the door to share the gospel, right?
Yeah.
So how can we train these business leaders how to conduct their business, connecting biblical principles with scripture? And that's what they're looking for. See, that's what pastors need to understand that. And again, if they don't have it, God has blessed them with somebody in a church of another business leader. So delegate it. What all the business leader cares about is my pastor cares about me and my business. He cares about my business because he sees it as a way to reach people with the gospel, not simply as an ATM machine. Remember, in the dissertation, it's very in there. I hold no punches. Business leaders really have a negative perspective towards pastors who believe they only look at them as an ATM and they only care about the money they bring to the church.
Yep.
It's a real issue. And
we call that the walking checkbook syndrome.
yes, I like that. But it's a problem. And business leaders don't, that's one of the reasons why they go to parachurch organizations.
That's right.
It's because they're not looked at as just the ATM. Now, again, I'm not against parachurch organizations at all, but I believe if parachurches and the church can both be equipping, wow.
Yeah.
That could be awesome.
Well, and it's interesting. One of my mentors was Howard Hendricks from Dallas Seminary, and he said the reason parachurch organizations start in the first place is because the church isn't fulfilling its mission.
Yes.
So a mission-oriented person starts a parachurch to do that, when really bringing the church back, as you're talking about, bringing the church back to what is the mission, and a pastor in particular is to equip the saints, us, you, me, right, for the work of the ministry, not to do the work of the ministry, but to equip us to do it, and not in Vacation Bible School only, but mainly in the marketplace. You know, Billy Graham said, 20, 25 years ago, he said the next move of God will be in the marketplace. And I absolutely agree with that. I just got off of a Zoom call I was telling you about with people whose jobs are spiritual leadership in for-profit companies.
Yep.
Big companies, investment companies, and all kinds of. So, but who's equipping them? And the answer is a pastor should. That's the answer.
But it's interesting you said we talk about equipping because the pastor's job is to equip the saints to the work of ministry, but it's not necessarily meant that the pastor has to be the one equipping. He can equip the one who knows and basically empower him. So I think there's equipping, and then there's empowering others to equip. That's
absolutely
just that.
Well said. Well said.
Secondly, what's interesting is, I told you I was ordained before I went to school or seminary, and somebody asked me, "Well, how did you do that?" I said, "You ready for this?" Go in close. My pastor discipled me. It was almost like, what? Again, we don't expect the pastor to disciple, 2, 3, 4,000 people in the church. What they can do is empower others and gift others to do it. And so that's what I would say. I would encourage pastors today. Listen, you're missing the boat. You're missing a major opportunity here. Listen, I'm going to tell you another part of the dissertation that was very revealing. When we asked the business leaders, did participation in the business leader discipleship group contribute to church growth? All the business leaders we don't care about church growth. It wasn't about church growth. We care about being in a place of influence, being in a place where we have a voice, being in a place where we can influence others to give us a platform to share the gospel. Mm-hmm. Yes. Do people come to church because of that? Yes, but that's not our purpose. When you talk to the pastors, it was all about church growth, and that's understandable. So when they perceived everything, it came across as though, it was like, we're investing into these business leaders so that they can contribute to church growth. Where the business leaders saying that's not our goal.
So let's bring this in for a landing, because you and I could go on for days and days and days. So as you look forward, I know there are a lot of our listeners who will really be blessed just by hearing your story, because it's so real and it's so available to every follower of Christ to have a similar journey. It won't be identical, but a similar path.
Yes.
So looking forward, tell it, what are one or two things you see, Robert, either that you see coming or that you hope and pray are coming?
There's two things that I would hope and pray are coming. First is I would be able to develop a curriculum for pastors to do what I talked about, to educate them on the need and to understand the clergy-lay divide. Because what I discovered in the dissertation is, I believe most pastors have the theology of work correct. They understand God's ordained work and everything like that. However, the practicum is far apart. And so that needs to come together. And so if I can be used as a catalyst to bring that together, to educate pastors. And then secondly, as I mentioned earlier, is to educate business leaders on how to use their business platform. One of the things that I believe it has to happen is, I believe this kind of has to happen for the future, which means, I think you need to develop curriculum for seminaries to educate future pastors and business leaders on this topic. Like I said, we can go to pastors, we go to pastors' conferences and hopefully be able to affect, but I think if we can entrench this into the seminary setting, whether it takes a parachurch organization or not. So I would love to be a professor to be able to teach this stuff, but I would love to be able to put together curriculum in order to facilitate this and to be able to go to pastors conferences, be able to go to business leader conferences, be able to go to entrepreneurial conferences, Christian, and to be able to really spark this, be a catalyst to just put this out there even more and more.
That's absolutely beautiful, and that is what's needed. I love the curriculum idea, and I'll kind of, I guess, come to a stop on this. But when I think about my own experience in seminary, I never had one course in business at all. And not even a whole, I never had one lecture on it. I was in business because I was having to provide for my family, but there was this gap between the concept of ministry and the concept of work or business. And as you've said, you've been in both for 30 years.
Yes.
That's got to be taught somehow to the next generation of church leaders, or we're never going to get it. So I love where you're going with this. I'm going to put, if it's all right with you, I'm going to put your email in the show notes so that anybody interested can pop your email. Yep. I'm hoping that not only will you do the curriculum, I'm hoping your dissertation will become a book of some sort.
Yes.
So much need.
So listen to this, Mike. I was thinking, I was just the other day, I kind of had an epiphany, if you want to call it. I was out walking or doing something, and I'm like, Cross Business. What the name of a book?
Yeah.
And again, my last name's Cross, but really Cross Business. I mean, that's what my life has been. I thought, so I would like to write a book based on the background I gave you, a little more elaborate, maybe share more stories about how I was able to pray with people. And I got a great story about a Lebanese woman we were sharing with who were Muslim, who let their kids come to our Bible study in the park. But yeah, I would, I do plan on writing a book, including the dissertation, the outcomes, and that is on my agenda. I would like to write some journal articles, start a possible podcast. So my brain, man, is just 100 miles an hour.
I know you're already starting to start stuff. And that's who you are. It's how God made you. Yep. So, Robert, thank you. God, I love talking with you. You just get me so energized. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Robert Cross, Dr. Robert Cross, who has not let his doctorate go to his head, but he's got a lot of stuff in his head and his heart he wants to get out. So look at the show notes for the email to get in touch with him. Don't deluge him, but it's not like we have 10,000 listeners. So we'll trust you to reach out. Get to know him. Look for his book. Look for his name in the business's mission, the integration of faith and work. You're going to see that name a lot because God has called him to it. Robert, give us one thought and then we'll sign off.
My final thought would be is, as I mentioned before, and I live by this, we need to have the integration of business and ministry, because you'll find that you will do more ministry through your business than you could ever realize. It's there. It's so much opportunity. And not only sharing the gospel, but praying with people, helping people in crisis. Business leaders are literally pastors on the job.
They are. That's exactly right.
They need to see themselves as that and understand that and not be intimidated by that, but use it as a way to point to Jesus.
Absolutely. Robert, thanks so much for the time. Great having you on the show.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Business as Mission podcast. We invite you to become part of the story by supporting the BAM podcast at patreon.com/BAM Stories. There's a link in the notes with this episode. For more information, go to thirdpathinitiative.com or tryventure.com. Please share this podcast and give us a review wherever you listen. If your business or ministry would like to sponsor the Business as Mission podcast, simply email info@thirdpathinitiative.com, and we'll set up a conversation about your needs and goals.